When were you first offered drugs? Was it university, sixth form? Well, when it comes to ketamine, children as young as 12 are getting hooked on the horse tranquilizer.
We're hearing that young people are putting their pocket money together and buying bags of ketamine.
So how are they getting hold of it, and what is it doing to them?
They don't make it to the toilet, they lose bladder control. I was watching my son crawl along the floor. Absolute agony.
And when that can happen, why are they taking it? I'm Lucy Watson, and this is What You Need to Know. Well, joining me to talk about this is digital reporter George Hancorn, and you've been investigating this, George, essentially. And first off, just tell me what kind of a drug that ketamine is.
So ketamine is a Class B drug. It's essentially an anaesthetic. So a lot of people describe it as a horse tranquilizer. So
yeah, that's
the
what
one
I've
thing
heard
it's
it
used
described
for.
as before. Yeah.
And it kind of makes users feel a little bit spaced out, a little bit numb, and it doesn't really have those sort of same come down effects that maybe other drugs would use. And that is where some of the issues have started to creep in for this drug, and that's what we've been looking into.
So if it doesn't have these come down effects, therefore, I can get the buzz or whatever that is without any negative days afterwards, like some other.
And if I'm starting to feel maybe not great, then I could turn to the drug again and I'll feel fine. And it won't be until those sort of later months that you start to have those complications medically and stuff, which we can get onto.
So we're talking about this today essentially because more people are taking it. It's on the rise. Younger people are taking it, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the stats around this are quite hard. We do have the ONS figures, the Office for National Statistics. So basically, ketamine use amongst 16 to 24s, it hit 3%, 3.8% in 2024. And that feels quite low as a percentage, but that is up 231% since 2013. And there's another way to kind of look at ketamine use. So this is of wastewater treatment. So this is kind of Home Office figures, and this analyzes the water that the toilet water that we don't want. So based on that, ketamine consumption is up 85% in the past year alone. That's across the UK. So that's obviously that's huge. 85%, which is a big figure, and that's kind of widespread right across the UK, and is an interesting way to look at how big the issue's become.
And you have been to an area very close to my heart, because it was where I grew up, to Cheshire, to look into this. Why there? I'm frightened to ask.
Well, several councils across the Northwest have essentially come out and said that they want urgent action on what is going on. So that's kind of where we focused our reporting there, but also
because you've been mapping kind of drug use across the country, and that's how you came to this investigation.
Yeah, so we've been tracking this for a little while, and there are various services where you can see what drugs are being in circulation. You can look at how drug markets change, essentially as well, see if there are any other products or chemicals in these drugs that you don't want to be in there that people may not know about. So that's kind of what we've been looking at. Particularly Chester West and Cheshire Council, they demanded urgent action to tackle the rise of this drug. And they were concerned essentially about how young people were using this. They say potentially as young as 12. This 12? Is 12 years of age, which is mad. This is what the councillor there who raised that motion, Lisa Denson, said.
We're seeing cases as young as 12. I think the main attraction to this drug is that it is so cheap. We're hearing that young people are putting their pocket money together and buying bags of ketamine. We need to take control now and educating our young people, our teachers, our parents, so that we can be ahead of this.
Age 12. I mean, that's just going into secondary school that we're talking about. She talks about the cost of it. How much are we talking? How can kids that young afford it?
So from people that we're speaking to, I mean, it could be as little as £5. So one of the ways that it's described is as easy as and as cheap as to go and buy a bag of crisps and a can of your favourite fizzy drink. And that feels quite mad. And that's, they're concerned that potentially kids are using their pocket money that they'd be given by parents in schools to buy it. And I think because some of the consequences of this are not truly known, it feels like a little innocent thing that kids are doing in schools, and it can have really detrimental effects on your body.
So these are the young people who are actually taking it, sharing it, whatever. But young people are also being used within educational environments to sell it amongst themselves. Is that right?
And
too?
that's what I think that from doing a lot of this reporting, that's the bit that, I mean, it's all pretty shocking, right? But that's the bit that feels quite mad, that these young people are not only, you know, kind of almost being taken advantage of and are using the drug and don't quite know, but the fact that they're involved in the spread of this as well. I mean, that's
slavery, ultimately. I've done a fair old bit on reporting on modern slavery, and that is very much like the County Lines model. I mean, it's the same thing. Young adolescents, or younger than that, perhaps in this instance, that they are, you know, put into environments, whether that be on a train taking drugs to a different area of the country, or inside schools selling them for these organised crime groups.
And that's what the police talk about. So we spent some time with Cheshire Police, and they talked about people as young as 13 potentially being used in this, the drug being sold in schools, the drug being kind of sold and moved around on school buses, and being in that environment, it's quite shocking. We spoke to some teachers in the local area who kind of didn't want to be known, but essentially said, yeah, we've had instances where, you know, the end of school comes and we've had to move children on because we've been concerned that dealing could be taking place in a play. I mean, that I'm not a parent, but that feels mad. I've been.
Well, I am. I mean, they're little, but they won't be little for very long, and it is terrifying. So I'm 44, and it's the age thing that's shocked me about this story. You're 28.
Yeah.
What has it been that's shocked you so much about this story? Because you've been on raids, you've seen some of the criminals involved. You know, you've seen lots of different aspects of it.
I think it's the age. It comes back to the age, but I think it's kind of almost there's this feeling that, you know, these people are so young, but also the harms that this drug, and, you know, a lot of it is to do with continued, you know, use, chronic use of this drug. Let's not, you know, not be too alarmist about it, but it is deeply concerning, and it's the age. I mean, if I can't really think back to when I was 12, right? But I don't think that this is the sort of thing that I would have ever anticipated anyone that I know doing or selling and that kind of thing. And I think that's quite.
So what does it do to their bodies? What does it do? Well, I mean, I know you said this is like the long term. This is what. Tell me what it does. What does it do?
So essentially, when you're using the drug on a kind of prolonged basis, it's what it can do to your bladder. So it can irritate your bladder. It might mean that you're having to go to the toilet a lot more frequently than you would otherwise do. Your bladder, essentially, if you're using it a lot over a prolonged period of time, it could shrink to the size of a pea, which is tiny, which means you're going to the toilet a lot. We were in a clinic in Runcorn, and they talked about
all these places I know so
well. We were in this clinic in Runcorn, and they were talking about the fact they've had young people come in who've essentially had to use adult nappies, and they're at that age where, you know, 18, 19, 20, and those are kind of the formative years of your life, right? You're in relationships, you're going on holiday, and potentially having to kind of be in that situation. I mean, that's not great to hear. Obviously, that's after prolonged chronic use, but we do know that roughly 30 young people aged 16 to 24 are currently in hospital receiving secondary care for ketamine-related injuries, and that's just in Chester alone.
And I know you've spoken to a mum of a guy and the effect it had on him. Is that right?
Yeah, so we spoke to Faye. So her son is in recovery, but was addicted to ketamine, started using that slightly later, around the age of 20. He's now 25, has kind of recovered from that. She worried that, you know, if it had been a week later, she may not have been able to get him the help that he needed. Here's what she said.
They don't make it to the toilet, they lose bladder control, the pain. I was watching my son crawl along the floor, you know. Absolute agony. The only way to resolve that was more ketamine.
What does she mean at the end, the resolving it by more ketamine?
Well, it's what we talked about at the beginning in terms of the drug having maybe slightly different effects, will be used as like a come down. So, you know, essentially it will numb the pain. So if you're having cramps because of your bladder and the issues you've had there, people often will turn to ketamine to numb that.
Then ease that pain.
And then there's that vicious cycle. And that's the scary bit from hearing it, you know, from Faye and other families that we've spoken to. I mean, you kind of almost feel helpless, right? If you're in that situation where you're in such severe pain and your only result is to turn to the thing that caused the issues, that doesn't feel right.
No. And if you're in the situation that she talks about there, her son, and he's in, you know, terrible, terrible pain.
Yeah.
He's not got control of his bladder. His bladder's shrunk, as you've just explained to me. Is that ever reversible? Can you get that fixed?
Well, we have heard examples of people having to resort to essentially their bladder being so small they're having to wee so often, and that's kind of it for the rest of life. Obviously, that's a very extreme example. That doesn't happen to everyone, and people can have treatment to help ease some of those symptoms. But the issue is, it takes a long time for those to kind of develop. So if you start using the drug at 13, 14, 15, it might take a prolonged period of time before you actually realize the damage that's done. And potentially that could be too late. And then that's the whole thing that we've been looking at is, these young people may not simply be aware what's going on, may not be aware the impacts the drug can have. And it's getting that education into those schools, but it is in those schools that often are where the drug is being circulated. And that feels quite weird to talk about.
But necessary at the same time. Now, you have spent a lot of time with police on this and kind of the authorities. And, I know that they've said to you, drugs is not an issue that we can police our way out of. So quite often at the end of these podcasts, we say, what's being done? What needs to be done? I don't really like asking that question, but how, because it's generally we can never completely stop something or completely eradicate it. But how you touched on education there. How can this particular issue be better managed then for our children?
Well, I think as you said, we spent time with the police. Locking a load of 15-year-olds up and putting them into that system isn't necessarily going to help. And the police admitted that. They said it isn't about that. It's that education. It is that kind of, testing stuff and the harm reduction advice that goes into schools to say, don't do this drug. This is, and certainly don't do this drug at the age of, 13, 14, 15 or 12 as one of the examples that we talked about. The kind of tightrope that's being walked at the moment is the Home Office are potentially looking at this drug being reclassified. It's currently a Class B, moving it up to a Class A. So that would put it in the same category as the likes of cocaine and MDMA. Now, that means that there's harsher penalties for that, but some of the bereaved families who've had children who've died from ketamine use over a period of time have said that isn't the solution. When ketamine was reclassified a few years ago to a Class B from a C, use has just gone up. So they would say that's not going to help. That's just going to mean that, it becomes even more taboo to talk about some of the harms.
So actually, they would rather it be part of a conversation more, is that it?
Yeah, I mean, some of them even say, look, we want to kind of reclassify this, bring it down, have this regulated so that it can be, because this drug is also used kind of medically in other ways as well. It shouldn't be used recreationally, and it is illegal to do so. But yeah, they kind of want to go in the opposite way because they say the way it's been done so far, like that's not working.
That's not working.
Yeah.
George, thank you very, very much indeed for chatting to me about that. And you can watch George's full report on itv.com/news. Remember to subscribe to What You Need to Know wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And you can watch full episodes on Spotify, ITVX and YouTube. Until next time, thanks for joining us.